Admiral Lee Ji-won stood on the bridge of Luna Station, watching the endless dance of ships moving through space. The year 2387 had brought another peaceful rotation of patrol duties around the Sol system. 47 capital ships moved in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming against the backdrop of stars. It was humanity's greatest achievement, a fleet that could protect their 17 colonies across 12 star systems. Ji-won had spent 30 years building this defense network. Every ship, every weapon, every tactical formation had been tested and refined. The fleet represented the combined efforts of billions of humans who believed they were alone in the vast universe. That belief gave them comfort, but it also made them careless. Dr. Park Min-ji hurried through the corridors of Luna Research Institute, her tablet displaying readings that made no sense. For 3 weeks, the deep space monitoring stations had been picking up strange energy signatures from the outer system. The patterns were too regular to be natural, too complex to be simple stellar phenomena. She had tried to warn the military officials, but they dismissed her concerns as wishful thinking. "Admiral," she had said during their last meeting, "these readings suggest artificial origins. We need to prepare for the possibility of contact." Ji-won had smiled politely and thanked her for the report. Like most military leaders, he believed in preparing for human threats, not imaginary alien ones. Wars were fought between nations, not species. Captain Kim Do-yeon checked his instruments aboard the UES Indomitable, humanity's most advanced battlecruiser. The ship was a masterpiece of human engineering, equipped with fusion reactors, kinetic weapons, and enough nuclear torpedoes to level a small moon. Every system ran perfectly. Every crew member knew their duty. They were ready for anything humans could throw at them. The bridge was quiet except for the soft hum of electronics. Lieutenant Choi Yuna sat at her tactical station, running routine sensor sweeps of the surrounding space. Her fingers moved across the controls with practiced ease, checking for asteroids, space debris, or other hazards that might threaten the patrol route. "All clear on sensors, Captain," she reported, not looking up from her displays. "Nothing unusual in our sector." Do-yeon nodded and continued his inspection of the ship's status reports. Everything was normal, just as it had been for months. The peaceful routine of deep space patrol was almost boring, but it meant their colonies were safe. That was what mattered. 3 billion kilometers away, Min-ji stared at her latest readings with growing concern. The energy signatures were getting stronger, more focused. Whatever was causing them was moving through space at impossible speeds, following trajectories that no natural object could maintain. She ran the calculations again, hoping for different results. The numbers remained the same. Something was coming toward the Sol system, and it was not human. She grabbed her communication device and tried to reach Admiral Ji-won again. The military needed to know about this immediately. Whatever was approaching had technology far beyond human understanding. The energy outputs alone were larger than entire stars. "Admiral, please listen to me," she said when Ji-won finally answered. "The readings are off the charts now. Multiple contacts, moving in formation, approaching from outside the system. This is not natural phenomena." Ji-won's voice carried tired patience. "Doctor, we appreciate your dedication, but our own sensors show nothing unusual. Perhaps your equipment needs recalibration." Min-ji wanted to scream with frustration. The readings were clear, undeniable, and terrifying. Something massive was heading their way, and humanity's greatest military mind refused to believe it. On the Indomitable, Lieutenant Yuna suddenly straightened at her station. Her sensors had picked up something new. Gravitational distortions at the edge of the system, followed by energy spikes that dwarfed anything in human technology. The readings were so extreme that she checked her equipment twice before trusting them. "Captain," she called, her voice tight with concern. "I'm detecting massive energy signatures at grid reference 77 Alpha. The scale is unprecedented." Do-hyun moved to her station, studying the displays over her shoulder. The readings showed energy outputs equivalent to dozens of fusion reactors operating at maximum capacity. No human ship could generate that much power. Run a full diagnostic on the sensor array, he ordered. These readings are impossible. Yuna's hands flew over her controls, checking every system, every circuit, every calibration. The sensors were working perfectly. Whatever was out there was real, and it was heading toward them. The gravitational distortions grew stronger, bending space itself in ways that violated human understanding of physics. Then the energy spikes intensified, becoming focused beams that cut through the vacuum like searchlights. The pattern was clearly artificial, clearly controlled, and clearly hostile. Jiwan received the emergency transmission from the Indomitable at the same moment that Luna Station's own sensors finally detected the approaching fleet. His calm confidence evaporated as he stared at the impossible readings scrolling across his displays. Thousands of contacts were emerging from what looked like tiers in space itself. The ships were enormous, each one dwarfing humanity's largest vessels by orders of magnitude. Their energy signatures indicated technology that operated on principles human science barely understood. They moved in perfect formation, following tactics that spoke of military precision and overwhelming force. All ships to battle stations, Jiwan broadcast across the fleet communication network. This is not a drill. Unknown contacts approaching the system. Prepare for possible hostile action. Across the Sol system, human crews scrambled to their positions. Weapon systems came. Online shields raised to maximum power, and engines prepared for combat maneuvers. The peaceful routine of patrol duty shattered like glass as humanity faced its first contact with alien intelligence. Minji watched the readings from her laboratory, her worst fears coming true. The approaching fleet contained more ships than humanity had ever built, each one carrying enough firepower to sterilize entire worlds. They had ignored every attempt at communication, responding only with ominous silence as they moved inexorably toward Earth. The human fleet spread out in defensive formations, their nuclear weapons armed and ready. They had trained for this moment without ever believing it would come. Now they faced an enemy that possessed technology beyond their imagination, weapons that could reshape matter itself, and a clear intent to destroy everything humanity had built. In the depths of space, the alien fleet continued its approach, confident in their overwhelming technological superiority. They had conquered 847 species across the galaxy, and this primitive civilization would be no different. The humans had barely managed to crawl beyond their home world, using crude chemical rockets and primitive fusion technology. It would be a massacre, but not the kind anyone expected. The human counterattack became a symphony of destruction that the galaxy had never witnessed before. Ship after ship of the Nexari fleet vanished in brilliant flashes of antimatter annihilation, their crews unable to comprehend how their overwhelming technological superiority had become meaningless in a matter of minutes. Captain Kim Do-hyun watched the alien flagship die around him as his torpedoes completed their work. The massive dreadnought that had seemed invincible moments before was now breaking apart in sections, its hull consumed by antimatter reactions that spread like cosmic cancer through its structure. All ships, continue the attack, he broadcast, to the human fleet. Target their largest vessels first. Don't give them time to adapt or retreat. Lieutenant Choi Yuna coordinated targeting data across the fleet, identifying the most important enemy ships and assigning them to human vessels. With working torpedo tubes, the aliens' own size and formations worked against them now. Their massive ships were easy targets for weapons they couldn't defend against. Fleet Commander Thex Valen tried desperately to organize a retreat as his flagship continued to disintegrate around him. Half his command staff was dead, killed when antimatter reactions breached the bridge's protective armor. The ship's exotic matter power core was fluctuating wildly as it tried to compensate for the structural damage. Warcast Bekthulon, order all ships to emergency hyperspace jump, he commanded, his voice cracking with panic. We cannot fight weapons that unmake matter itself. But Bekthulon was no longer responding. His tactical station had been vaporized when an antimatter torpedo struck the command deck, taking him and half the bridge crew with it. The survivors struggled with unfamiliar controls as their ship's systems failed one by one. Dr. Park Minji watched the battle unfold from her damaged laboratory, hardly believing the sensor readings that showed alien ships disappearing from existence at an incredible rate. In less than 10 minutes, the human fleet had destroyed more enemy vessels than they had lost in the entire previous engagement. "Admiral," she transmitted to the emergency command center, "their fleet is in complete disarray. They're trying to retreat, but our ships are faster and more maneuverable. The aliens built their vessels for overwhelming firepower, not evasive action." Admiral Lee Ji-won felt a surge of fierce satisfaction as he watched the tactical display update. Red enemy contacts were vanishing faster than his computers could track, while blue human ships pressed their attack with devastating effectiveness. The species that had come to exterminate humanity was learning what human determination really meant. Sensor Prime Velcarix worked frantically at his damaged station, trying to analyze human tactics for any weakness that might allow a Nexari counterattack. But there was no defense against antimatter weapons deployed at close range. The humans were using their ships as guided missiles, sacrificing themselves to deliver weapons that could destroy targets 1,000 times their size. "Fleet Commander," he called out desperately. "The humans are coordinating their attacks to maximize damage. They're targeting our power cores and command sections specifically. They understand our ship designs better than we understand theirs." What Velcarix didn't realize was that human military doctrine had always emphasized analyzing enemy weaknesses and exploiting them ruthlessly. While the Nexari had grown complacent after centuries of easy victories, humanity had spent their entire history fighting wars where the slightest advantage could mean the difference between survival and extinction. The destroyer Phoenix, badly damaged but still functional, made its final attack run against an alien battlecruiser. Captain Park Yuna knew her ship was dying, its hull breached in a dozen places and its reactor core running critical, but she still had torpedoes and a target. "This is Captain Park of the Phoenix," she transmitted. "Beginning final attack run. Tell my family I died fighting for humanity's future." Her antimatter torpedoes struck the alien vessel's reactor core in a perfectly coordinated pattern, triggering a cascade failure that propagated throughout the ship's exotic matter power grid. The battlecruiser folded in on itself as its own. Energy systems turned against it, amplified by the antimatter annihilation reactions. Human ships pressed their attacks with suicidal courage, their crews knowing that each enemy vessel they destroyed was one that couldn't threaten Earth or the colonies. The tide of battle had turned completely. Instead of helpless prey being hunted by superior predators, the humans had become the hunters, and their weapons could kill anything. Warcast Bechthulon's replacement tried to coordinate defensive formations, but Nexari ships had never been designed to operate defensively. Their doctrine called for overwhelming offensive power to crush resistance before it could develop. Now they faced an enemy that couldn't be crushed, only delayed. "All ships, maintain distance from human vessels," the new tactical commander ordered. "Use long-range plasma bombardment to destroy them before they can close to torpedo range." But human ships were faster and more agile than anything the Nexari had encountered. They used asteroid fields and debris clouds for cover, approaching their targets through routes that larger alien vessels couldn't follow. Every time the aliens thought they had trapped a human ship, it would slip away and attack from an unexpected angle. Lieutenant Yuna brought the Indomitable around for another attack run, this time targeting the alien fleet's command vessel. The massive ship was trying to retreat toward the edge of the system, but its exotic matter drives couldn't accelerate faster than human fusion rockets operating at maximum power. "Captain, we're in range of their command ship," she reported. "Their defensive screens are at maximum power, but it won't matter." Do-hyun nodded grimly. "All tubes, full spread. Let's end this." 24 antimatter torpedoes streaked across space toward the Nexari command vessel, each one carrying enough destructive power to level a city. The alien ship's defensive screens tried desperately to intercept them, but antimatter reactions occurred outside the normal electromagnetic spectrum that their shields were designed to handle. The torpedoes struck home with devastating precision, each impact creating a localized annihilation event that erased sections of the enemy ship from existence. The command vessel's hull rippled and buckled as matter-antimatter reactions spread through its structure like cosmic wildfire. Thexvalon felt his ship's death throes as the bridge around him dissolved into elementary particles. The greatest fleet in Nexari history, 2,000 ships that had conquered hundreds of worlds, was being destroyed by a primitive species that should have been extinct within the hour. How? He whispered to himself as antimatter reactions reached the bridge. How did we lose to primitives? The answer was simple, though he would never understand it. The Nexari had encountered their first enemy that didn't follow galactic norms, a species that had turned the most dangerous force in the universe into their primary weapon. Humanity had weaponized annihilation itself. Dr. Minji watched the final phase of the battle with awe and terror. In 17 minutes, the human fleet had reduced the mighty Nexari armada to expanding clouds of elementary particles. Not a single alien vessel survived the encounter, while humanity had lost 31 ships to collateral damage from their own weapons. "Admiral," she transmitted, "it's over. The alien fleet has been completely destroyed. We've won." Admiral Jiwan stared at the tactical display showing empty space, where moments before the most powerful military force in the galaxy had threatened to exterminate humanity. They had survived first contact, but they had also announced their presence to the universe in the most dramatic way possible. The silence of space was broken only by the soft hum of human ships regrouping, their crews struggling to comprehend what they had just accomplished. They had faced extinction and emerged victorious, using weapons that their enemies literally could not defend against. But victory came with consequences. Somewhere in the depths of space, other alien civilizations would soon learn that the Nexari Dominion had been utterly destroyed by an unknown species. The galaxy was about to discover that humanity had arrived, and they had brought antimatter. Fleet Commander Thexvalon stood in the command center of his massive dreadnought, studying the primitive star system spread before them. The third planet showed signs of basic industrial development, while several moons and asteroids had been colonized with laughably simple technology. This would be the easiest conquest in his long military career. The Nexari Dominion had perfected the art of preventive genocide over 1,000 years of galactic expansion. Any species that managed to achieve spaceflight was immediately eliminated or enslaved to prevent future competition. It was a simple policy that had worked 847 times before. This would be number 848. Warcast Bekthulan, report on the primitive defenses, Thexvalon commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never known defeat. Bekthulan consulted his tactical displays with obvious boredom. 47 capital ships, approximately 300 smaller vessels. Their weapons appear to be kinetic projectiles and primitive fusion devices. Energy output suggests they are barely capable of interplanetary travel. Sensor Prime Velkarix confirmed the technological assessment. Thexvalon continued. Velkarix manipulated his instruments with practiced efficiency. Confirmed, Fleet Commander. These beings have not yet discovered exotic matter manipulation or zero-point energy extraction. Their ships operate on simple fusion reactors. They pose no threat to our defensive screens. Thexvalon allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The Dominion scouts had been correct. This was a newly spacefaring species that had barely managed to establish a few pathetic colonies. The mission parameters called for complete elimination within one standard cycle, but this would take far less time. The Nexari fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect battle formation. 2,000 ships arranged in a three-dimensional pattern that maximized firepower while minimizing exposure to enemy weapons. Each vessel was a testament to Dominion engineering, equipped with plasma cannons that could vaporize mountains and defensive screens that could absorb the output of entire stars. Captain Kim Do-yun watched the alien ships materialize on his tactical display, feeling his blood turn cold. The enemy fleet was larger than anything he had imagined possible. The smallest alien vessel was twice the size of the Indomitable, while their largest dreadnoughts stretched for kilometers through space. "Communications, open a channel to the alien fleet," he ordered, hoping against hope that this was some kind of misunderstanding. Lieutenant Choi Yuna worked frantically at her station, trying to establish contact with the massive alien force. "Channel open, Captain, broadcasting on all frequencies." Do-hyun stepped forward, knowing that the next few minutes would determine the fate of humanity. Unknown vessels, this is Captain Kim Do-hyun of the United Earthship Indomitable. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions. We wish to establish peaceful contact. The response came immediately, but not through communication channels. Thexavalon had no interest in conversation with primitives. The Dominion ultimatum was always the same, and it was delivered through weapons fire rather than words. Plasma cannons erupted across the alien fleet, sending streams of superheated energy toward human positions. The first target was Luna Station, humanity's command center and greatest achievement. The plasma beams struck the station's defensive shields with the force of a small star, overloading every system in seconds. Admiral Lee Ji-won watched in horror as sections of Luna Station simply ceased to exist, vaporized by weapons that operated beyond human understanding. Emergency alarms screamed throughout the facility as hull breaches and system failures cascaded through the structure. All stations, prepare for evacuation, he broadcast, knowing that most of his people would never make it to the escape pods. This is Admiral Ji-won. The station is lost. Save what you can. The alien attack continued with methodical precision. Plasma beams lanced out toward civilian colonies, orbital habitats, and mining stations. The Nexari doctrine was clear. Eliminate all infrastructure to prevent any possibility of resistance or recovery. Dr. Park Min-ji huddled in her laboratory bunker, watching the destruction through sensor feeds from across the system. Her warnings had come too late. The aliens possessed technology that made human defenses look like children's toys. Their weapons unmade matter at the molecular level, while their ships moved through space as if physics were merely a suggestion. On the Indomitable, Do-hyun tried desperately to coordinate a response to the alien assault. All ships, scatter formation. Make yourselves difficult targets. Return fire with everything we have. The human fleet opened fire with nuclear torpedoes and kinetic weapons, their most powerful armaments launched in a desperate attempt to inflict some damage on the alien force. The weapons streaked through space, closing the distance to their targets in seconds. Warcast Bechthalon watched the primitive attack with mild interest. Human projectiles incoming, Fleet Commander. Estimated impact in 30 seconds. Raise defensive screens to minimal power, Thexavalon replied dismissively. No need to waste energy on such pathetic weapons. The human nuclear weapons struck the alien defensive screens and simply vanished, their energy absorbed without causing even the slightest damage to the Nexari ships. The kinetic projectiles fared no better, deflected harmlessly into empty space by force fields that could stop asteroids. Lieutenant Yuna ran rapid calculations on her tactical computer, searching desperately for any weakness in the alien defenses. Every simulation showed the same result. Human weapons were completely ineffective against Nexari technology. Their shields could absorb nuclear explosions as easily as a person might brush away dust. "Captain," she reported, her voice tight with despair, "our weapons are having no effect. Their defensive screens are beyond anything in our tactical database." Sensor Prime Velcarix noted the curious energy signatures coming from the human weapons, but dismissed them as irrelevant. The primitive fusion devices were exactly what he had expected from a species that had barely achieved interstellar travel. Their nuclear weapons were little more than chemical explosives compared to Dominion technology. What he failed to understand was that those fusion devices were actually matter-antimatter annihilation warheads contained within magnetic bottles that prevented premature detonation. The Nexari had never encountered antimatter weapons because no other species in the galaxy had been foolish enough to weaponize such dangerous technology. The first exchange lasted exactly 4 minutes and 12 seconds. In that time, the alien fleet destroyed 3 orbital habitats, crippled Luna Station, and vaporized 18 human vessels. The Nexari lost nothing, their shields barely registering the human attack. Thexavalon studied the tactical display with satisfaction. The human resistance had been even weaker than predicted. Their primitive weapons could not penetrate Dominion defensive screens, while Nexari plasma cannons could eliminate human ships with single hits. "Begin the systematic elimination of all human presence in this system," he commanded. "Start with the outer colonies and work inward. Leave the homeworld for last. I want them to watch their civilization burn before we destroy them." The Nexari fleet began its leisurely advance toward Earth, moving with the confidence of predators who had cornered helpless prey. They had conquered hundreds of species using the same tactics, and they saw no reason to change their methods now. But they had made a critical error in their analysis of human technology. What they interpreted as primitive chemical rockets were actually sophisticated delivery systems for the most destructive force in the universe, and humanity was about to show them exactly what antimatter could do when properly deployed. The human fleet scattered like leaves in a hurricane, trying to avoid the devastating plasma beams that turned their ships into expanding clouds of vaporized metal. Captain Kim Do-hyun watched his tactical display with growing despair as more red icons disappeared, representing the deaths of thousands of his fellow humans. "Damage report," he called out, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Heavy casualties across the fleet," Lieutenant Choi Yuna replied, her fingers flying over her controls. "We've lost the cruisers, Dauntless and Defiant. The battleship, Resolute, is heavily damaged and falling back. Sir, our weapons aren't even scratching their shields." Dr. Park Min-ji worked frantically in her damaged laboratory, analyzing the enemy weapon signatures through the station's surviving sensors. The alien technology operated on principles that human science barely understood. Their plasma cannons appeared to manipulate matter at the quantum level, while their ships moved using some form of exotic matter drive that warped space itself. But there was something else in the sensor data, something the aliens might have overlooked. Their defensive screens were designed to absorb energy weapons and deflect physical projectiles, but they operated using a completely different energy matrix than human technology. The incompatibility might be exploitable if she could find the right approach. Admiral Lee Ji-won coordinated the evacuation of Luna Station from an emergency command bunker deep within the facility's core. Half the station was gone, vaporized by alien weapons, but the remaining section still held over 10,000 personnel. Every minute they delayed meant more lives lost. "Sir, we're picking up a priority transmission from Dr. Park," his communications officer reported. "Put her through," Ji-won ordered, hoping the scientist had found something useful in the chaos. Minji's voice crackled through the damaged communication system. "Admiral, I've been analyzing their defensive technology. Their shields work by creating resonance fields that absorb energy and deflect matter, but they're calibrated for weapons that operate on exotic matter principles. Our technology uses completely different physics." "What are you saying, Doctor?" Ji-won asked, ducking as another explosion shook the station. "Our nuclear weapons aren't failing because they're too weak," Minji explained urgently. "They're failing because the alien shields don't recognize them as weapons. The magnetic containment bottles around our antimatter cores are registering as simple metal objects." Warcast Bechthalan reported to Fleet Commander Thexvalan with obvious satisfaction. "Human resistance continues to crumble, sir. Their ships flee before our advance, and their weapons cannot penetrate our weakest defensive screens. This species appears even more primitive than initial estimates suggested." Thexvalan nodded approvingly. "Excellent. Maintain current pace of advance. I want the human homeworld to have time to receive distress calls from their colonies. Fear makes the final conquest more satisfying." Sensor Prime Velcarix continued monitoring human activities, noting their increasingly desperate attempts to inflict damage on the Dominion fleet. The primitive beings were launching everything they had: kinetic projectiles, fusion bombs, even crude chemical explosives. None of it was having any effect whatsoever. What puzzled him were the strange readings coming from the human reactor cores. Their ships appeared to be powered by controlled matter-antimatter reactions, which was theoretically possible, but incredibly dangerous. Most species abandoned such technology once they discovered safer exotic matter manipulation. "Fleet Commander," he called out, "the humans appear to be using antimatter reactors. Should this be cause for concern?" Thexvalan barely glanced at the report. "Antimatter is a primitive energy source, Sensor Prime. Our own ships used similar technology millennia ago before we developed current systems. Continue monitoring, but focus on tactical threats." Captain Do-hyun received the emergency communication from Dr. Park just as another human destroyer exploded under alien fire. Her words sent a chill down his spine, but also sparked a desperate hope. If the alien shields couldn't properly recognize human antimatter technology, There might be a way to exploit that weakness. Engineering, he called out. Can we modify our torpedo warheads for direct antimatter injection into target hulls? Sir, came the reply from his chief engineer. That would require removing the magnetic containment systems. The torpedoes would become unstable, likely to detonate during launch. How unstable? Doyon asked. Completely unstable, Captain. We'd have maybe 30 seconds from launch to impact before the containment fails. Miss the target, and the torpedo explodes wherever it happens to be. Lieutenant Yuna looked up from her tactical station with sudden understanding. Captain, if Dr. Park is right about their shield frequency, an antimatter detonation inside their defensive perimeter would cause cascading failures throughout their energy matrix. Their own power systems would amplify the damage. The idea was insane, suicidal, and completely outside standard tactical doctrine. It would require getting close enough to the alien ships to ensure accurate torpedo strikes while under heavy fire from weapons that could vaporize them instantly. But it was the only plan that had any chance of success. Dr. Minji continued her analysis of alien technology from her bunker, watching as more human ships died under the relentless plasma bombardment. The Nexari were methodically eliminating every trace of human presence in the outer system, moving from target to target with casual efficiency. But she had found something important in the wreckage of destroyed human ships. When the alien weapons struck their antimatter reactors, the resulting explosions created brief distortions in the enemy defensive screens. The aliens' own shields were vulnerable to antimatter reactions occurring within their protective envelope. Admiral, she transmitted to the emergency command center, I'm sending you the shield frequency analysis. If our ships can deliver antimatter directly into contact with their hulls, bypassing the defensive screens entirely, the resulting reaction should overwhelm their power systems. Admiral G1 studied the data with growing excitement. It was a desperate gambit, but it was better than watching humanity die without fighting back. All ships, this is Admiral G1. We're implementing Emergency Protocol Samson. All vessels are to modify their antimatter torpedoes for direct injection attacks. This is a volunteer mission only. The response was immediate and unanimous. Every surviving human ship acknowledged the order and began preparations for what would essentially be suicide attacks. They knew the odds, but they also knew that conventional tactics had already failed. If humanity was going to die, they would die fighting. Fleet Commander Thexphalon watched the human ships regroup with mild interest. The primitives were rallying for one final futile assault on his fleet. It was almost admirable in its pointlessness. Their weapons had proven completely ineffective, and their ships were no match for Dominion technology. Shall we accelerate the extermination, Fleet Commander? Bekthulon asked. We could eliminate their remaining forces in minutes. No, Thexphalon replied with predatory satisfaction. Let them make their final charge. It will be amusing to watch their last desperate attempt at resistance before we sterilize their homeworld. The human fleet began its attack run, every surviving ship accelerating toward the massive alien formation. They carried modified antimatter torpedoes that would explode if they missed their targets, piloted by crews who knew they probably wouldn't survive the next hour. But they also carried something the aliens had never encountered before, the desperate fury of a species fighting for its very existence. The galaxy was about to learn why humans had never developed energy weapons. They had never needed them when they possessed something far more destructive. Dr. Park Minji made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden in the sensor data from destroyed human ships was proof of something the galaxy had never seen before. When alien plasma weapons struck human antimatter reactors, the resulting explosions created tears in space itself that the Nexari technology could not contain or control. The aliens had designed their defensive systems around energy weapons because that was all they had ever encountered. Across 847 conquered species, every civilization had followed the same technological path, developing exotic matter manipulation, zero-point energy extraction, and plasma-based weapons. They had never met a species that weaponized the fundamental forces of creation and destruction. Humanity was different. Humans had developed antimatter technology not as a stepping stone to more advanced energy sources, but as their primary method of power generation. What other species considered too dangerous to use, humans had turned into the foundation of their civilization. "Admiral," Minji transmitted urgently to the emergency command center. "The alien shields aren't just vulnerable to antimatter reactions, they're completely helpless against them. Their defensive matrix can't process matter-antimatter annihilation events. It's like trying to stop a tsunami with a fishing net." Admiral Li Jiwan felt a surge of hope for the first time since the attack began. "Doctor, are you saying our weapons can penetrate their defenses?" "I'm saying our weapons don't need to penetrate their defenses," Minji replied excitedly. "Antimatter reactions occur at the quantum level. Their shields operate in normal space-time. When antimatter encounters matter inside their defensive perimeter, the resulting energy release bypasses their protection entirely." Captain Kim Do-hyun received the updated tactical data just as the Indomitable began its attack run toward the alien flagship. The massive Nexari dreadnought loomed ahead of them like a small moon, its hull bristling with weapons that could vaporize his ship in seconds. But now he understood why their previous attacks had failed, and more importantly, how to make them succeed. "All ships, new firing solution," he broadcast to the human fleet. "Target the antimatter cores directly at enemy hull sections. Ignore their weapons. Ignore their shields. We're not trying to punch through their defenses. We're going to make them irrelevant." Lieutenant Choi Yuna worked frantically at her tactical station, calculating trajectories and timing sequences for weapons that had never been designed for this kind of attack. The modified antimatter torpedoes were essentially guided bombs with 30-second fuses, unstable enough to explode if they so much as brushed against an asteroid. "Firing solution locked," she reported. "Range decreasing. Enemy weapons are targeting us." Plasma beams lanced out from the alien flagship, missing the Indomitable by mere meters as Do-hyun threw the ship into evasive maneuvers. The alien gunners were used to targeting ships that moved in predictable patterns, not human vessels that danced through space like fighters instead of capital ships. Fleet Commander Thex Valon watched the human attack with growing amusement. The primitive ships were charging directly at his fleet in what appeared to be a suicidal ramming attack. Their previous weapons had proven completely ineffective, and now they seemed to be abandoning tactics entirely in favor of desperation. "Warcast Bekthulon, are the humans attempting to ram our ships?" he asked incredulously. "It appears so, Fleet Commander," Bekthulon replied. "Perhaps they believe their primitive hulls can damage our vessels through physical impact. It's almost pitiful." Sensor Prime Velcarix continued monitoring the strange energy readings from human ships, noting that their antimatter reactors were operating at dangerous levels. The primitive beings seemed to be overloading their own power systems, probably in a final act of defiance before their inevitable destruction. What he failed to recognize was that the overloading reactors were actually being prepared for controlled release. Human engineering had long ago solved the problem of safely handling antimatter by using magnetic containment fields that could be precisely manipulated. Now those same fields were being reconfigured to release their contents on command. The first human ship to reach optimal range was the destroyer Valiant, captained by a young officer named Lee Dong-hyun. His ship was badly damaged, listing to starboard with half its weapons offline, but its antimatter torpedo tubes were still functional. "This is Captain Lee of the Valiant," he transmitted to the fleet. "Beginning attack run on enemy cruiser, for Earth and humanity." The Valiant's torpedoes streaked toward their target, not the massive alien vessel's shields or weapons, but specific points on its hull where the antimatter could make direct contact with the ship's structure. The Nexari defensive screens tried to intercept the incoming projectiles but found nothing to deflect. The torpedoes appeared to be simple metal containers with no energy signatures worth blocking. 6 antimatter warheads struck the alien cruiser's hull simultaneously. For a split second, nothing seemed to happen. Then reality exploded. The matter-antimatter annihilation released energy equivalent to a small star going supernova, but concentrated in an area smaller than a city block. The alien ship's hull simply ceased to exist, unmade at the fundamental level as matter and antimatter canceled each other out in perfect, devastating symmetry. The explosion propagated through the alien vessel's structure faster than its systems could respond. Internal bulkheads, power conduits, and crew quarters were reduced to their component atoms as the annihilation reaction spread like wildfire. In less than 3 seconds, a ship that had seemed indestructible was reduced to an expanding cloud of elementary particles. Warcast Bek-Thulan stared at his tactical display in absolute shock. Fleet Commander, the cruiser Dominion's Pride has been destroyed, completely destroyed. I'm reading total structural failure across all sections. Thexvalon felt a chill of fear for the first time in his military career. How is that possible? Their weapons couldn't even scratch our shields. Unknown, sir. The human projectiles appeared to be simple kinetic weapons, but the explosion was unprecedented. Energy release equivalent to a stellar event. Sensor Prime Velcarix frantically analyzed the sensor data from the destroyed cruiser, trying to understand what had just happened. The human weapons had somehow triggered a matter-antimatter reaction of incredible magnitude, but that should have been impossible with their primitive technology. Then he realized the truth, and it terrified him beyond measure. The humans weren't using antimatter reactors as power sources. They were using them as weapons. Every human ship was essentially a flying bomb carrying enough antimatter to annihilate entire fleets. Fleet Commander, he called out urgently, the humans are weaponizing antimatter. Their ships are armed with matter-antimatter annihilation devices. Our defensive screens cannot stop such weapons. More human ships reached attack range, their crews coordinating with desperate precision. The destroyer Phoenix targeted an alien battleship, its antimatter torpedoes striking the enemy vessel's reactor core. The resulting explosion tore the massive ship apart from the inside, its own exotic matter power systems amplifying the destruction as they interacted catastrophically with the antimatter. Captain Do-Yun brought the Indomitable within point-blank range of the alien flagship, so close that he could see details on its hull through the bridge viewports. Plasma cannons swiveled to track his ship, but human vessels were faster and more maneuverable than anything the aliens had encountered. All torpedoes full spread, he ordered. Target their power core sections. Lieutenant Yuna launched every antimatter weapon the Indomitable carried, 24 torpedoes that streaked across the final few kilometers in seconds. The alien flagship's defensive screens tried desperately to intercept them, but the shields were designed to stop energy weapons, not physical objects that carried the power to unmake reality itself. The antimatter warheads struck the massive alien vessel across its entire length, each one triggering a localized annihilation event that erased matter from existence. The flagship's hull buckled and twisted as sections of it simply vanished, leaving gaps in its structure that exposed the interior to the vacuum of space. Fleet Commander Thexvalon felt his ship dying around him as antimatter reactions cascaded through its hull. The greatest achievement of Nexari engineering was being reduced to its component atoms by weapons that operated on principles his species had never encountered. All ships retreat, he broadcast desperately. Emergency hyperspace. Jump. The humans have weapons that can destroy matter itself. But it was too late. The human fleet had found their weakness, and they were exploiting it with ruthless efficiency. Ship after ship of the mighty Nexari armada disappeared in brilliant flashes of annihilation energy, their crews never understanding how primitive humans had achieved the impossible. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous weapon is the one your enemy never expects you to have.